All right. Welcome back, John. Good to have you again on the podcast.
Great, thank you for having me, Emily. I look forward to our chit chat here. It's been a stretch since I've been on this series of yours.
It's been a couple of years, and I will include the link to our previous conversation where we really focused on education. And of course, you've been in this realm for how many years?
Oh, it's up on 20 years by now.
Couple decades.
Yeah.
Couple decades in school, and then creating your own school and working with both young people and adults to educate them through Institute. And I have been a beneficiary of the Institute, studying Latin with you, which is awesome. And so just to kind of catch up a little bit before we get into our main topic, what are you currently enthused about in the realm of education? What are you working on? What's exciting to you?
Great. Well, there's all sorts of things at Apocatastasis, just in the nuts and bolts, and then there's some other stuff to that question that's appropriate to that question in the larger field of education. But just immediately, the big thing that I'm working on is what I call the project, and this is a series of readings which will ultimately be stretched out over 3 years. And what these will do, poetry readings, and then each day, or near enough to each day, for those 3 years, there will be a selection from largely the Story of Civilization series, as well as H.G. Wells's outline of history. That'll be the first reading of the day. And then second will be from appropriate literature of the time period from the caveman days up until today. There will be some other additions besides the two mentioned. And then the third reading each day will be something of philosophy or religion or of the spiritual. And this will be coordinated all together in sync over those 3 years. So if we're reading about Rome, as we once did in history, then we will also be looking at we'll say the Aeneid at the same time, and then maybe something about Stoicism. And that will slowly change. Those readings will be in sync over 3 years. And that's an interesting project, but it's appropriate, especially to Apocatastasis, because I see this as being the real keystone in the years ahead of what we offer. It will be able to synchronize our actual in-student body that's studying for our integrated 3-year or 2-year curricula, as the case may be. It will also synchronize those students who leave us, and they can still be part of that cycle of readings, and will also provide a skeleton around which to give our open events for our distance learners and things. So I see this as a real leap forward in that idea of integrated learning, the idea of having this whole synoptic or lowercase c Catholic unified vision of reality, which I believe much of modern pedagogy, including a lot of this alternative ed stuff, overlooks. So that's the big thing. And then just briefly in the short term, we have a lot of collaborations going on at Apocatastasis with different scholars, and that seems to be a very successful route in building our staff up. I've tried different approaches in the past, but this seems to be quite well received by different people, whether that's mathematics or different personal enrichment courses or health stuff, as we'll talk about a little bit later. This seems to be the step forward in really growing this beyond us, the John Coleman hour, let's say. And then finally, we have some of our high schools are graduating in the next month or so. So I have to, take care of degrees and how do you say, transcripts and wind down events and things like that. So that's in the
Mm.
near term. Anything
Mhm.
you want to say about that before I give you just more abstract things?
Well, I wanted to ask in terms of the project where it sounds like you're looking at some more, I don't know, conventional or mainstream history
Hmm.
texts. And I know you and I have exchanged various emails that include links to some alternative history investigations, research. And so I'm just wondering, how do you reconcile, how do you approach those more conventional history texts at this point when there's so much coming up questioning those narratives?
Wow, what a great question that is. And um, a lot of us have been confronted with this, especially even as of this recording, these alleged findings in Egypt with the pyramid, and this is most remarkable if it's indeed the case. These tunnels underneath, or some massive structures in any case underneath, and things underneath them, uh, and yeah, there's that aspect. But where I'm coming from with this, yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, what am I using? Series that are nearly a century old in either instance with Wells or with the Durants. Um, I mean, not just alternative history, but even mainstream history has largely moved on from those texts and those approaches. But what I find their value in, and I should point out, with your literary background, we mean to have quite a hefty dose of poetry in between all of those readings. So
Hmm.
there's a certain structure there. But um, th- even given their weaknesses, I do not subscribe to the idea that everything's been rewritten, or there's almost a totality. I mean, maybe it's the opposite, which I come across a lot with education, with current events, with conspiracies, which is not a bad word at all with myself. There's a very human tendency, and I've noticed this with a lot of people, to have have been brought up in mainstream education, and they go hardcore once you see some problems to hey teacher, leave those kids alone. We don't need no education. Um, and in many other ways too. You see it, people who grew up in a secular environment, they go hardcore fundamentalist, or vice versa. They grew up in a restricted house religiously, they felt, and vice versa. It's they want nothing to do with faith at all, and so forth. And that's a human tendency. And I see something of that happening with history as well. And I do think with these synoptical histories already mentioned, that there is a benefit, coming from a stance where I don't believe everything is just total BS before the 1800s or something. There's a skeleton there, and those outlooks that those authors have, for whatever their own defects and whatever the dating, the outdatedness of some of the material. Um, the great benefit of those of that, and of learning the classics and the humanities over centuries, is this feel of the human story. And I can't teach that in a podcast here. I can't really teach that to students who aren't open to this taste, just like one needs a taste for liquor, or for soda for that matter, or for some fine food. You have to develop that taste, um, and you can't really tell someone about that. It's something you acquire, and that's why this series. The idea is that the person who participates in it, even after they leave us for years, maybe for the remainder of their life, will constantly be coming across the human story, and that will allow them at appropriate times, as their interest allows, to break up into their own research. But it allows this structure, and that, I think, is the enduring benefit, to your question, of these series, whatever their defects. And defects the authors are well aware of. I mean, my goodness, look, this is H.G. Wells, who's also a kind of a suspect character, yeah, in other ways. We all know about the War of the Worlds nonsense, but this
Right.
is the outline of history. This is supposed. I mean, he knows this is there are limitations to doing all of human history in one volume, but it at least gives you a starting point for discussions, and that's how
Right.
I've used it in class.
Well, and it seems a great answer. And it seems also useful with the awareness that this is, of course, not the be all and end all of exactly what happened historically, but also to look at those texts as narratives embedded in their own time, in the time that they were written, and as cultural constructs of that time. So to have that kind of both and perspective, like, yes, there's some solid information here, and this is also a a creation that has its own particular contextualization and perspective. um But I love what you're up to in terms of pairing or pairing, can you pair three
Triplicating.
things? Triplicating the literature and the history and the philosophy of a certain time, because that also, as an English major, like the way that reading literature gives us such a strong sense of where people were coming from historically. What is the feeling of that time and sensibility of that time? So that sounds ambitious and exciting. And before I asked my challenging question, you were going to say a little bit more about what you're up to at the Institute in the short term.
Yes, it just in the more abstract, besides the nuts and bolts and all this jazz, in the more abstract answer to what's exciting at this moment with education. On the one hand, I don't want to get overly optimistic because formal education for Americans, and I presume this is largely an American audience that we're speaking to, formal education, right or wrong, provides almost the only coming of age ritual that we are allowed in this society. And that means it's going to be very difficult, and has been for the past century, difficult as we've lost a lot of our organic culture, I believe, over the last century. Um, School is really the last schooling, as we understand it, is the last ritual that we all share in common, for good or bad. And so that's going to make it very difficult to update or change or replace. And because people have, I think even most people couldn't even say this out loud. They wouldn't have the words for it, but it provides a certain anchor of experience, as rituals do. So that's the counter argument to what I'm about to say. But I am excited actually about AI. And a lot of us grew up for mathematics in particular, being told, when will we need this as good capitalists? When will we need this in our jobs? To which we were replied horrible answers. What was the answer, Emily?
When will we need this? I don't know.
Well, you're not always going to have a calculator, are you?
Oh, right. Yes.
And it turns out we all do have calculators. Turns out that some of those calculators can explode on you at if the right person presses a button. um, but in any case, um, I'm excited about the AI thing. I hope, because it will basically clear our classrooms of, if you forgive the expression, but dead wood. We'll keep it there. Dead, people there for 100 years. We've had this schizophrenia, and maybe longer still, um, between the teacher in the classroom, please God, who is trying to be there for encourage a life of the mind, and the vast majority of students, who, if they have any consciousness of why they're in that room, has something to do with some economic success in the future. And the way I see things shaping up is that a lot of homeschooling is getting so sloppy at this point that the state is going to come down on it and regulate it out of existence. And that legal scaffolding is being built, just so everyone is very well aware. This is happening on the states. Um, so eventually, homeschooling is going to be shut down by the state, as I see it. And the state is going to shut down public schools too. And I believe the public schools are being let by the state to get discredited in the eyes of the public. Hence in my belief, very suspect school shootings and lack of discipline and so forth. Crazy curricula, crazy books by some of these TikTok videos, apparently crazy instructors. I believe that is being put out by the state to deliberately discredit the schools. And the whole point is that alt ed, so-called, and mainstream is going to be shut down by the state. Everyone's going to be given some state-issued certification on Zoom. Is having a lot to do with AI, and almost everyone at this point is going to go for that. And I'm not happy about any of that. Um, but what I am happy about is that the people who really want to learn are going to be still left. And as teachers, we won't have to slog through people who don't want to be there, and who would be better off served if they want, they want their credential. Now it's going to be there on a silver platter, and we don't have to pretend that we have, we have a foot in both worlds anymore. The people who really want a knowledge, they'll be there, and everyone else, the herd, will have gone off to wherever Zoom will take them.
It's so interesting you brought that up with AI, because that was going to be my next question for you, in terms of things that have shifted even just in the last couple of years since we spoke, that we've had this explosion of AI everything, and kids having AI write their school papers, and teachers having AI correct those papers or comment on those papers, where it's like, oh, what are we even doing here? What a joke. Which, yeah, and I think it sounds like what you're describing in terms of where education is headed is unfortunately probably right on. And I hear you about the benefit of people who really want to learn, and the teachers who really want to teach. And I imagine also the parents who really want their kids to actually learn something and not just be, parroting back whatever AI is um, expounding upon, whatever that might be. So, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time altogether, and the the problem is that it's really been a catch-22. You can take this even back to the early modern period, um, but certainly even in the 19th century here in America, we had Horace Mann. The problem, what I'm alluding to, is that you have people with a specialized knowledge and a way to present things, and they've largely had to shuck and jive, and I speak of myself amongst this, and try to present ourselves to people who don't necessarily understand what a life of the mind is beyond just a cool bumper sticker. Um, and that's led to a culture increasingly where educationalists have had to, present themselves as service sector workers, and the society has replied in kind. And I've heard this on these even the alternative ed, so-called solution podcasts are, they refer to teachers as service sector employees. I've heard that as a almost direct quote. That's not what teachers are. I mean, the teacher historically is something akin to a parent or a religious figure. It is a completely different category in many cultures, including our own up until not that long ago. But we've had to, because of the market, the market just sucks in everything, becomes a commodity to be bought or sold. And so this led to a discourse where, the college in Danbury nakedly says, they're trying to sell their master's degrees, master a degree of difference was one of their ad campaigns. And the schools have very nakedly um, presented themselves as, economic stepping stones.
Right.
And so now to an extent, we will solve your problems, or they solve themselves, right? We've allowed this schizophrenia for 100 years. Well, now we have to pull off the Band-Aid and decide, is it going to be pure just naked credentialism, or are we serious about learning? And that's, I hope, the fork in the road that we're presented, and it's a difficult fork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whew. Okay. So, um, you have also been venturing into the realm of conferences, and recently put together a very impressive geopolitical conference. And the recordings are now up, and I'm going to include a link to that in the show notes. But do you want to say a little bit about that conference and how that went, and what was I don't know, what were you excited about with that conference?
Yes, and just speaking of notes there, I will give this as well for your notes for the audience may be interested. To this last point about education and where we're at, there was a very interesting article put out on Substack, which you frequent and I frequent, and this other author, Ted Joikia, put out. And he was talking about, um, almost this spirit in the air, this generational spirit in the air, that's, making it very difficult for teachers to teach. And so I think that would be a very helpful article the audience may avail themselves of, because we've all been kind of noticing certain generational things. I've seen in older people too, just in their behaviors and their dress and their comportment and eye contact and things. But that's just the beginning of it. So I would anyway. I'll toss that your way, and the audience
Great.
can read that as they like.
Great.
Anyway, to the geopolitics conference, that speaking about another area that's moving very quickly. Um, I mean, as of this recording, in Britain the other day, there in multiple publications, this talk about America becoming part of the Commonwealth and all this stuff. We'll see. You know,
Yeah.
we'll see. They've been at it for about 200 years trying to get America back. We'll find out. But anyway, things are moving. They're moving very fast. And we had this conference a couple weeks ago, and those things take a lot out of you, as you know, Emily, with your own work and your own retreats and things. There is a certain high that comes with successfully pulling those things off as well. But yeah, we looked at the title was Geopolitical Turnings, to my earlier remarks, and it was a 2-day conference. We had 15 speakers altogether, and it all came together in its own whimsy. We had our high schoolers kind of set things up, unbeknownst to them, looking at the early Cold War world, and they spent a month on those projects, putting everything together and coming over panic attacks and all this. And then we moved into various disciplines. We had other staff members like Dr. Fisher talk about, the aspect of fear and geopolitics and the whole role of fear, COVID-19, anyone, in world events. And I spoke on a few things. I spoke on principally the disgraceful betrayal of Syria by the world community to ISIS, which the world community so-called invented. I may be off to join them pretty soon with this beard. You podcast people can't see, but my ISIS beard it's right now it's at rabbi level. So if I go into Manhattan as I do, I get the shaloms on Fifth Avenue and so forth. But I'll be soon enough. I'll have occasion to pull out my curvy sword and head off to the desert. But anyhow, I spoke about Syria and that. I spoke about an anniversary I haven't heard. First of all, Americans haven't seemed to have any memory that we're at the 20th anniversary of Iraq last year, the beginning of the war. Nobody cares because everyone's forgotten, I guess. So the people without limbs haven't forgotten. All the dead babies' parents in Iraq haven't forgotten, or in America for that matter. But whatever, people forget things. So I spoke about that. I spoke especially about the topic of nudity in the war as a protest tool, as a torture policy, frankly, Abu Ghraib, which it is this year, the 20th anniversary of that scandal. Also of that topic as regards the handicapped who have it, now thrust in their lap, privacy and so forth all of a sudden. And then finally, as some of these interesting kind of lighthearted groups of healing from PTSD. So it was a very interesting kind of foil to look at the war through. After all, wars are fought over bodies of land, bodies of water. They're fought with people's bodies. So I thought it was fun to use that, more than fun, I hope, to use that angle. And then I spoke finally on trade zones, looking at trade zones. And we had other people. I won't give you the whole list here, but we had Danny Katz talking about propaganda. We had David Wemhoff on the UN and international law. And finally, just as a brief drive-by, we had Thaddeus Kaczynski talking about the philosophy of authority in the world order. And he talked quite a bit. He has a book out on COVID-19. He talked quite a bit about power, which we saw in COVID-19, versus actual authority, genuine, natural authority versus just power, and the difference between those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very impressive, comprehensive. I love that you included the high school kids, and I've loved the presentations that I've watched so far. I watched the one on fear and Danny Katz's excellent talk on propaganda. So yeah, congratulations on pulling that off. Great job. And I know you have another conference coming up on health and wellness coming up in July. July 25th to 26th, correct? And so what inspired you to do a health and wellness conference? What does that have to do with education and Apocatastasis?
Yeah. So maybe if I can step back from that just to orient our dear listeners and viewers respectively, Apocatastasis says out loud what every school does implicitly in every schooling modality down to you at your homeschool table. And that is something that we're obsessed at here is something that's present implicitly in every educational modality ever made, and that is a look at the social role that education plays in society. And it is my belief that schools ought to have a positive benefit to that, that schools have a social role, uh, one way or another, that social role has largely been co-opted and abandoned one way or, one, or if it's not a co-opted, it's being abandoned. And that a lot of social problems that we speak about go back to the way we were instructed for many, many years of our lives.
Hmm.
And so that if we can correct uh, education, and I do believe there's a role for formal education in the classroom, not to discount other modalities or unschooling or anything like that, but I do believe that most people do well in classroom settings most of the time. Um, that education, formal education, is a fulcrum for social reform. I know conspiracies almost as good as you, Emily, and as your audience. And often we look at the situation of the world and we look at the problems, however we would define it, and we get overwhelmed. And with personally speaking, with the Apocatastasis, this is my little battle station or whatever simile we want to use in things. You choose something to do well, and you do that well, and that's one's area of the battlefield. And so that explains the here at Apocatastasis, that explains the rather wide diversity of things that we get involved with. I've always, for these nearly 11 years, maintained, hopefully myself personally and the administration of the school, as any other college. And so go down to your local state school down the road, right? They have different clubs, they have different departments, they have um, uh, different lectures on campus, and all of those are outreaches to the public. The only difference, I think, between us and them is scale. We have much smaller people to work with and a significantly smaller budget to work with. But I've always tried to verb that vision there. So in the big picture, that's where we're coming at: social reform in the classroom and out of the classroom, making a common ground with people with different politics, different religions, different worldviews, and not making enemy out of other people with other things. I've seen that so much in the past few years. People, they just cannot compete. We're so isolated by this social media that has directed us, that I don't care on your whole spectrum where you're talking about. I can give you examples of hardcore anarchists that we had, all the way to your 501c3 religious sorts. And it's the same phenomena I'm witnessing, is that you say one thing certain people don't agree with, and you become the enemy. And we have to rebuild that common ground, which I think schools are excellent for.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so part of that is conferences, and then part of that is the health conference. So to your initial question, Emily, the reason that is appropriate to our work, and we can really kind of get into the mud here, and that simile of soil is going to be very important to understand this event and really everything we do. Um, there's an old medieval saying that grace builds on nature, and that is from the Christian paradigm and even in the secular people, they have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you know the Maslow, we all know Maslow from high school or college, whatever. It's the same idea with the scholastics. The idea that if you're uh, hungry, if you're starving, you need to figure that out before you figure out the fact that you're cold or that you're sunburned. And then when you figure out your food, then you can worry about clothes. And then once you get that, oh wow, I'm really wet, I should probably build something over my head like a house. And once those basic needs are met, then you can get to higher things in society. Then you can get to fashion. Then you can get to different cuisine. Once you've solved the basic food, then you can play around with it. And to put a sock in it to your question, this health conference is appropriate because Grace builds on nature, and if our bodies are sick, and if our minds are sick, and we have sick communities physically and spiritually and mentally, etc. Speaking, uh, we can't really worry about education, and until that's done, we can't worry about culture. And often you'll even see on the schematics on our site, you'll see soil. I'll use the image of soil because I think a lot of people, they have a lot of good ideas about social reform and betterment, but where a lot of us lose perspective is that we haven't anchored it in culture. And so you have all across in many, many communities, reform efforts, betterment efforts, and they never seem to go anywhere. And part of that is, I believe, because we've lost the idea of culture and neighborhood bonds, family bonds, and historical bonds and generational bonds, and that's really the work. So it's a massive vista that we've taken on, but none of that's going to go anywhere if we are busted physically and psychically.
Right, which seems, I mean, that seems to be the trajectory we've been on, and it really escalated, I think, during COVID when the kids were sent home to sit in front of computers. I mean, I know even like first graders sitting in front of a computer for hours, and that becomes their education. I mean, that just seems like such an assault on the body and what we actually need as humans, and what we need to be to be in the kind of state that where we can be receptive to learning and be active participants in the educational process. Sitting in front of a computer does not seem supportive of that. And of course, what you described earlier about how you see the future of education, I mean, even, yeah, even more so. So yeah, it seems like there's a denial of our basic needs as humans in bodies, and even the trend toward canceling physical education. I think that gets booted along with music and art pretty quickly when budgets are cut. Yeah.
Mm. Oh yes, for certain. And it's always the gym class that's always on the chopping block first. With that, I mean, to the point that uh, in high school, you have gym class, you don't have recess, though. It's interesting that in some of these alternative communities, I worked at a little parochial school, which was largely recruited from homeschooling families whose mothers were pulling their hair out when the kids got to high school and pulled on the priest's ear long enough to create this school. But I was very impressed for as many ways as I was unimpressed by that school. I was very impressed that they had recess through 12th grade. I mean, just to get out and moving and breathing air on top of gym and things.
Right.
Um, and I think a lot of that comes from, I believe, fundamental errors that we've made. So I've already alluded to the fact, I don't think it's much up for debate, that education in this country is geared towards commerce. And in so many ways in my life, and I'm sure in your life too, Emily, and the audience in your own ways, we see a problem, and then oh my God, it's connected to another problem. It's connected to a third, and we say often as historians that the historian, actually the statement is for plumbers. The plumber begins in the kitchen and he ends in the street. That is to say, he finds a problem with the faucet, and oh my goodness, there's something on the U pipe. Oh, got to change that, and then you keep you keep finding more problems till you're out on the mains in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're trying to confront this problem of education and to restore it, which is what the word apokatastasis means in Greek, um, I think we ultimately need to go back to what I believe are errors in commerce. Because, I mean, at least the public schools are honest enough to say that they're preparing people to be, wage slaves, right? They are public, and public means commercial. And once you understand that the adjective public means commercial, all of a sudden, like 95% of everything we're bitching about in schools makes sense.
Right.
because you have to dumb people down to work for somebody for their whole life, much less to work for the wages this society tolerates, or the so-called benefits or lack thereof. You have to numb people down. Oh, why isn't the wonder why you've killed the child's wonder? We've maybe seen pictures of the child on the first day of school at kindergarten, they're so happy, and then like the 30th day, they're burned out as they'll stay for the next 12 years. Well, you have to do that if you want to make a wage slave. I'm not encouraging it. I'm just saying the public school is honest enough to admit they put public on their marquee. A lot of us in alt ed have the exact same hopes, but we want to pretend that, we're rebels. I've seen that a lot. You'll unschool for 12 years, but then why did you I'm really I asked this question so much this year. Like, what are we doing in alternative education? What type of society do we want? Okay, we complain enough about the public schools, and we do enough, and we have enough of our head on straight to react to that, and we homeschool now we unschool, and now we road school Emily. But at the end of the day, like, what are the metrics of why homeschooling is great? What do they tell you? Well, look, our kids get into college just as much as the so-called normies, and we pride ourselves that we're not normies. And there's a whole, there's kind of ego thing going on there. We can approach maybe later or some other time. But I mean, we have to ask ourselves, what are the fundamental assumptions? And I believe, having done this now for 20 years, that most people, even in the alt ed world, have economic assumptions about education. I don't want to bog down to the ed stuff. We're here to talk about health. But one of the I'll put it all together here. One of the problems I believe fundamentally in this society that we make economically, and this is true for capitalists and socialists and communists and fascists. It's all these modern things are all the same problem. Is that this pen that I keep holding up to the audience who's watching? This pen was made so that the pen maker could make money off of it. The pen itself in modern economics has no value in and of itself. It's only valuable to the producer for what you can get out of it. And the value of the pen has been lost. And that super future preference, where so much so that the object itself doesn't matter as long as you can make the transaction, that trickles down to education, to our point about health. Why is this appropriate to a school? Because we've also, in terms of the human being, put the cart before the horse. Many traditional societies, including, again, even in America, which was never a traditional society in any sense of the word because of the development of our history. Even in America, you had a trade. You learned a trade before you learned academics. And that goes back to the ancient world. Grace builds on nature. And one of the biggest problems we're having right now is people, they don't actually have life skills. They have no economic skills. They're super credentialed, but they have no, even down to personal skills. And we see that. And finally, I've kind of wound my way a long way to this answer, but I hope I've made some sense here. Finally, bring things back to the health stuff. That disorder goes down even to our day in the class. Where over these hours of our school day, we're sitting there. We have a body, and it maybe gets a half an hour of exercise, and the rest of our time in school is just physically sitting there, supposedly gobbling up data. And that creates a disconnect. And so there's these disorders, I believe, really do compound throughout life to the point that you end up with what I believe is the display case of the disorder of our society in our time, which was the COVID-19 nonsense. That was the shock test of how disordered so much of our life has become in the West. And it goes down to the fact that our own health is, and our appreciation of our bodies is so disordered.
There's so much there, and my mind was going in many directions as you were speaking. But one thing that came to mind is, thinking about what's the foundational problem, issue in modern education. And I was thinking about part of that being this mind-body split, this illusion that our head, our brain is separate from the rest of us. so that it's totally fine for education to be just all about the mind and to totally discount the body. And I think this has something to do with, I mean, definitely like you're saying, this education at this, for the most part, is in service to commerce and in service to creating workers who are also expected to ignore their bodies. I mean, for people who are working in offices or factories and doing the same repetitive thing over and over again. I mean, there's a reason we have a poor health epidemic. There are reasons, there's reasons so many people are both mentally and physically not in good shape. Because after, spending 12 years in school, ignoring our bodies essentially and prioritizing the mind, and then going into jobs where we're also expected not to feel our bodies. I mean, I think part of that is also being conditioned to turn off our natural physical instincts, starting with, can I go to the bathroom? No, you can't. It'll be time to go to the bathroom in 20 minutes, where it's like we have to pretend that we just have to shut it down, even these very natural impulses of what the body needs, whether that's going to the bathroom or just, moving around. Can I stand up? No, you will be sitting down for the next half hour.
Excellent. Yeah, even down to that sort of thing. Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, it's pretty obvious to me the so-called ruling class is in many regards waging war on the population they believe they have authority over, and they're very successful in that. You should come to Connecticut sometime, Emily. We have delightful chemtrails. You wouldn't believe the right angles that they get up there. And we could do a whole a whole 5 hours on the machinations of these people in terms of the fluoride and the this and the that and whatever. I think people are familiar enough with that. But there's also, to maybe more appropriate right now, there's also just the aspect of human nature or the way life is, and there is an aspect, and different traditions have different language of this, but of concupiscence and of just the fact that I'm going to be lazy. And if I can eat the Dorito bag, I'm going to have a tendency to eat the whole damn Dorito bag. And yeah, maybe some son of a gun put MSG in it to trick me, and he uses bright red colors, and okay, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I shove those delicious Doritos with that fake cheese in my mouth for an hour. And that gets to another point, not just the bathroom stuff or the raising the hand or moving around or wearing shoes, all day indoors for no proper reason. Cutting off that tactile sensation, which is, just like our hands, has a lot of nerves that are not being stimulated. But also to this point that I'm contributing here is agency. Agency. So you speak of the mind-body split, and right on you for doing that. But also is this other cognate reality of agency. Why did I put the Doritos at 30 odd years of age in my mouth? Because that faculty of my soul was not developed and was deliberately retarded, because the purpose of these systems are to create workers. So obviously you don't want your workers thinking like entrepreneurs. Obviously you don't want your slaves learning to read and connect the dots. And we learn, and this is, a lot of people, and I shouldn't, negate it too much. Maybe for rhetorical reasons, downplay agendas and, deliberate steerings of things in society via education. I've kind of poo-pooed that for the past few years, but I do that only to make a point that I want to make now, is that the problem with Rockefeller education, which is largely aped in private school, which is largely aped in traditional homeschool, the problem with it is not the fact that Heather Has Two Mommies is being taught, or much weirder books now. I have one of these graphic novel, genderqueer. I downloaded that thanks to Yandex. You get any book you want on Yandex, it turns out. But yeah, I mean, what they say about that, the filth of that book is correct. That's a problem, and whatever. We could go on and on about examples, but the real problem of modern education, this is what I'm saying, is the stuff between the lines. It's those unwritten lessons to our initial point about the broken concentration that we're given, because the subjects are broken up at the beginning of this talk, right? No one talks about that, but that splitting of attention and that sequestration of knowledges, human knowledge, science and literature and gym or whatever, and the breaking up of one's perception of reality, that's the legacy of real legacy of Rockefeller education. And finally, when it comes back to agency, there we go again. Uh, the just the very nature of modern pedagogy completely saps the agency out of the student. And I see it too. I see it in alt education too. And when I, by the way, if you're not familiar with my rhetoric for the audience here, I'm not saying this from the reason I keep needling homeschoolers and unschoolers and whatever the hell it is I do in the college world is from a place of support. And I just want to be understood with that tone of voice. Think of me as like a coach. That's the coach doesn't hate you. He's just trying to get you to shape up a bit. But that agency, that lack of agency, I see it across the board in public school, but I'm going to be in a public school pretty soon for a living history thing. I'll see it again. And I see it all the way down to your homeschool co-ops around here, that there is no fire in the belly of the child. Part of that gets to that article the audience may read in the notes, the Ted Gioia article, that there are cultural energies at work, which are a lot larger than agendas, and that's just a much bigger discussion. But part of that too is this childhood is so padded, it's so protected, it's so laid out that the student really has no fire in the belly. And that too, in addition to the mind-body split, is a big thing of why we take bad health habits into our life.
Well, and what you're saying about agency, that seems quite true also of teachers, maybe especially in public schools, where I think most people go into that profession fired up and wanting to make a difference. And I've seen friends, in fact, friends who went ahead of me on that path, because that's the path that I thought I was going to go on initially, where they were broken down by the bureaucracy, by the administration, by the constraints on what they could and could not actually teach or how they were supposed to be. So it seems like it's not only the kids, but also the teachers who end up with that lack of agency and just, phoning it in instead of really teaching in the way that we would like teachers to teach.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just as an example, I'll be in we call it junior high. Actually, now they call it intermediate. It's like another level. It's like fifth, sixth, seventh grade. They have all these designations. But the point is, I'm doing a living history there. First of all, I'm a soldier and I'm not allowed to have a gun, which is just so lame. And you wonder if my boys don't care about this stuff. So I'm supposed to be like this Revolutionary War soldier. And oh, you should have seen the face. I just had to ask at the meeting, like, can I bring my gun? You should have seen the faces on these bureaucrats. I'm talking not my machine gun. I'm like a musket, But anyway, to the teacher point, yeah, I saw it last year. I'll see it this year. I mean, they're just moving kids around, and they haven't. It's not like they're bad people. I mean, they didn't sign up for this, but it's a check, and they're not allowed to teach. I don't think it's like the 20 minutes of hate. Everyone likes to beat up on the public school teachers. They're not your enemy. In fact, when this thing comes down, as it will, we're going to need these people's talents. This is why you don't hear me, Emily, right? We work together. You don't hear me trashing the mainstream teachers. Why? Because they're going to be out of a job soon. They're going to be coming to our homeschool co-ops, and we're going to need their help. So this whole thing's coming down. This whole thing is coming down, but this whole education thing's coming down, and we have to rebuild, and we have to have that mindset. And these poor teachers, I see them at these assemblies, and they're just, moving the kids around, and you break your heart to see, because some of the kids, like, they want to engage with you, but no. I remember one girl in particular, she was really into the scenario we were doing, because they play a little like detective game and whatever, and she was giving us advice for the next year, and she'd been about 12 years old. But then, like, the class has to leave, and come on, Susie Q, we have to go, and it's just this conveyor belt.
Yeah,
And the teachers are just as much victims as the students.
absolutely. So turning the conversation then, what does healthy education look like? What is your ideal vision for education that would be honoring of the humanness and the bodies of the students, and that would promote well, that would eventually lead to a functioning, healthy society versus what we have now?
Yeah, I think a lot more physical activity, especially for the younger grades, we'll say before what we call in America high school. But even in high school, physical activities there, way more than there are now. And also to re-envision the classroom. In fact, as we speak about re-envisioning of the classroom, one of my down my sleeves, I have all these essays that are waiting up my sleeve that I just have to write. If only they had more hours in the day. But one of those sleeved essays, which will come out sometime, is talking about understanding biological realities. Is what we call the teenage years, is that really the best time to be doing higher learning? Meaning you have an individual, right or wrong, has come to have certain expectations of this time in life, including economical expectations, an awakened amorous instinct, and there is an opening in the soul, and the body is developing, yes, but the soul is also developing, and the psyche. Many people, I remember you said at 12 or 13, that's when you wanted to get into astrology. Uh, After reading a book, I mean, we have these windows in our lives where things are open. It's not just physical changes. So part of re-envisioning the classroom, to your point, to your question, Emily, is having that serious discussion. Should we, especially given social dynamics, this isn't the 1800s where maybe there was more maturity for all sorts of reasons in younger people, and there was a much, I believe, much more mature understanding of culture and education and life, frankly. But that's not where we're at right now, and we have to deal with these different dynamics. And part of that is maybe we should put the bird down, as I say, to end formal education at the onset of puberty. We'll say at eighth grade or whatever that is, and then culturally to have a place at this point, right? Not making judgments, but maybe what would have been maturity of a 14-year-old now is something that someone achieves at 22 now. Culturally have a place where it's just as easy to go to. You don't have to call it high school in the 20s. No one wants to go to high school in the 20s. Just call it college. But have a place where it's easily accessible. You can put down your studies for 6 years, go chase skirt, go drink beer, go work, go have some capital, steal your labor for a couple of years. You'll learn. Don't worry, you'll learn. And now you're 22, and we have a place in this time of life where you're more mature. You've gotten through all the fun stuff. I learned it's not always that fun, and now you're ready for the studies that have been heretofore for the past century kind of foisted on people who haven't the maturity or the interest.
Yeah.
High school age, early college age.
Yeah, I remember when I was in college, and especially I spent my junior year at Smith College, and they had a program there for older students. And I was always very impressed by them, and a little bit jealous of them, because they were coming in with life experience, with an understanding of what they really wanted to study. And they were there 100%, right? Where at my age, yeah, I loved learning. I was interested, but I didn't really have life experience that would turn me in a certain direction to know, what do I really want to know. And and I think a lot of us in college were flailing about a bit and just studying because we're supposed to be there and our parents expect us to go to college. But there was something that was so, yeah, I was just really impressed by the older students, because they seemed so much more they were coming in with so much more intention and commitment and dedication to the process. And it wasn't just by accident that they were by accident of age and family expectation that they were doing that.
Yeah, I had a similar observation coming up myself that there was just it was a different caliber altogether of learner,
Right.
and it had to do with that maturity.
Yeah. And, I also wonder about what you said earlier about how we come out of education with not maybe pretty much no life skills. Like, I think it's
Hmm.
ridiculous that we don't know how to, we don't learn how to grow food, for example, or basic self-care or healthcare or basic relational skills. How to, conflict resolution would have been a great class in high school or something like that. And actually the college I did graduate from, Brandeis, they had a requirement that you had to pass a swimming test because back in the early days of the university, a graduate had drowned a couple
Mm.
years after graduating. He had drowned because he didn't know how to swim. And so they were like, yeah, you have a college degree, you should have this basic skill of being able to swim. So we all had to pass a swim test. But of course, there are all kinds of other useful life skills that were not emphasized or not mentioned at all. And that also seems like something could be a worthwhile thing for the adolescents to be putting their energy into, learning how to change oil in the car or plant a garden or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. That's remarkable. In fact, I used to when I was in Ridgefield, I used to teach the high school how to do oil changes and
I
how
wish
to do
I'd
the
learned. That would be great.
right. Yeah, it's amazing too, and I think part of that had to do with our parents, and I think our parents are probably about the same generation, baby boomers, and and that you had the World War II generation, that wanted everything to be super safe and probably less than safe, which is a very modern obsession, but calm, quiet. After the 30 years, after the 1930s and the Depression and the World Wars, you just want quiet. And if you think, we had that stereotype of the 1950s being very fake and very white bread, in fact. Yeah, I mean, if you were blowing up Japanese on Guadalcanal, you probably could use a bit of calm and and quiet. And so what that created is the baby boomers attitude, which I think we're getting the worst of now. And I don't mean to dump on the baby boomers because it's too common. Every generation has their strengths and weaknesses, and that's kind of become the hot thing now. But one of the definite problems of that generation, I believe, coming off the World War II generation, was everything had to be packaged and presented to you. If you could hire someone to do it, that was the best course of action. I can think of multiple people in my life that had this. They deliberately did not learn skills because it was almost beneath them if they could hire someone to do it or if they could buy it out of a box. That's how
Right.
it would be. And that is like Shakespeare says, the good men do is buried with them. It's the wrong linkers on after them. And so whatever was good about the World War II generation, the baby boomers is going in the ground, but their bad habits continue. And part of that is um, this aspect of, and I'm channeling my inner Ivan Ilyich, my deschooling society. Let me see if I got it here. Hold on. Um, Ivan, where are you? Here we go. All right, Ivan Ilyich, right? So he points this out with Deschooling Society. Nice little book. You probably get it on Yandex for free, like everything else. Ivan Ilyich was originally a Jesuit, but he ended up leaving the ministry and became a sociologist in the 60s. And he points out in this little gem that one of the problems of institutions is that they almost gobble up all of life. And we're almost in a catch-22 talking about physical health and learning life skills, where I believe, in many ways, a healthier society where people had more agency, they would go out and learn how to change a tire or learn how to have oil, how to change oil and change the filter and all, et cetera, how to have a conversation. this idea, this spirit, I think, was more prominent in the past where, "Oh, I'm deficient in something. Let me become proficient in it."
Mhm.
One of the problems of institutionalization is that we come to rely on institutions to the more we spend in institutions, the more we expect the institutions to provide for us, and the more and it becomes a snowball effect. Um, the more you see the student not doing what they should do in class, and the teacher swoops in, or the parent for that matter, swoops in and corrects them. They have solved the problem in a short term, but they have not actually solved the fundamental problem, and they've actually made it easier for that problem to replicate, because every time you swoop in and correct somebody, you've actually robbed them of the chance of self-correcting. And so I don't know the right answer to this, because we're in this catch 22 about life skills. So we have generations now, because of the historical stuff I alluded to, generations now that have no fire in the belly, no self-guidance. Everything has to be presented on a platter, and there are economic reasons for this and propaganda reasons too. But that's what we're dealing with. So I guess the institution that they're in, the school or the homeschool, whatever their curricula is, I guess they have to provide that. Unfortunately, that doesn't do anything to actually solve the problem of self-starting, of self
Right.
awareness.
Right. Right.
Um, it solves the problem intermediate, but it doesn't actually, like, speaking about health, we'll keep it PG-13. I was talking in a health class with one of the students yesterday. There are many right now. There's a company in America, because the men are so overly stimulated erotically that many men cannot function normally, even in their 20s. They've so burned out their nervous system that there's actually a drug. It's like basically it's super Viagra. It's called Blue, and every other commercial is for Blue.
Ugh.
And so, this thing, this so-called medicine has, yeah, it solved the problem of the man performing, so as they call it. Um, Interesting word in the context, but it's just like what I'm alluding to with the education stuff. You actually haven't solved the problem. You've overridden, your body's like crying out for help and relaxation, and just, to hibernate for a bit. You're not going to stop that problem. Apparently, you're just going to override it with some chemical. You've
Wow.
solved the problem. It's the same with like life skills. I had to take. I'll shut up here, but I had to take in college. This is how bad it was. This was a while ago now. They had like an interpersonal skills class. They had a conversation class, and I hated it at the time, but I realized, maybe not the wisdom of that class or whatever, but I realized the wisdom of having that on the curricula, because we couldn't hold a conversation at 20. We should be able to, but we weren't able to. So
Yeah.
the institution had to. It's gotten so bad now. Right now at the college I alluded to in Danbury, they actually have to, I'm not making this up, they have to provide dress advice. They have a whole little department they've started, because the students have no idea how to do a job interview. So they have to actually coach them to do a job interview. All the students have anxiety about meeting a stranger because of the masks. So they have to they have counseling there. They provide clothing. People are so sloppy, and they don't even have a Sunday best anymore, or funeral clothes, or most people don't even have this stuff anymore. The school actually the institution has to provide what the society used to provide. I don't know
Right.
what's going on, but yeah.
Well, and also what families used to provide, because I'm just thinking about how, my mom knew how to sew. My mom would sometimes sew clothes for us because she learned, I'm imagining, from her mother. And I never learned how to sew. I mean, also my grandmother was a master gardener, and so my mom learned from her, but I didn't learn that from my mom. And of course, there's the whole breakup of the family, and divorce, and single parents who are working and don't have time to teach anything to their kids if they did have those skills to begin with. But then I totally see what you're saying about it's not really solving the problem at a fundamental level to turn that over to the institution. And what is it that what returns us to our agency, or what ignites agency in young people so that they will acquire those skills on their own or find a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, part of in the big picture, one of the big changes in the 20th century, it's a whole other podcast why this happened, but is that social institutions went from being in support of people to being absolutely at war with them in their psychology. And the institutions, what is the saying from the Bible? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The institutions were made for men, not men for the institutions. And and you have this flip in the ruling class, which always has hiccups and wicked people and things, but the spirit of the institutions um, was fundamentally nurturing up until about the time of the World Wars, about the time. Whether that's spiritual institutions, economical ones, educational ones, in many ways, cultural ones. And that's flipped. The marriage laws are a great example of that. And and it's become, and this is my final point to your what you brought up, it's become weaponized. So you have natural human vices and weaknesses and lethargy and that concupiscence that's naturally part of being alive. That's okay. What you didn't have in days gone by was the social institutions that had weaponized those and had spent time with their psychologists figuring out the exact perfect ways to manipulate that in order to divide society. And so you have a situation socially of incredible handicap right now in terms of self-starting that agency because so much works against it. And we can give so many scenarios, but yeah, it's like that old saying, foundation once destroyed, what can the just do? Well,
Mm.
the just can just heave ho a bit more. I mean, that's all. Final point on this. What is the definition of success? I believe in this society, we've taken the wrong definition, and this would also be true about a lot of the so-called truth movement. We believe we see a problem or education or this or that or the other. We see a problem, and we have, I believe, what I would call a very Roman or English understanding of victory, which is that we annihilate and defeat our problem. We have solved our problem. And in order to, when we're confronted with I believe, an adamantine problem of the lack of agency from whence none of this is really going to go anywhere, educationally or otherwise, we need to change our definition of victory and have what I might call a Celtic understanding. Um, and that is that we don't surrender to the problem. If you understand Celtic mythology, and I'm sure other traditions have this, it's rather stark. Norse mythology as well. It's rather stark. But the universe is evil. The universe destroys the gods. But what is great about the gods is that, and I'm sure I'm flubbing. I'm sure I'm flubbing the specifics of this. But for my kernel, I believe I'm on point. That what's glorious and heroic about the gods is they, even in the face of absolute destruction, they still fight on. And I don't believe our situation educationally or otherwise is nearly as grave as that. But the point is, what is victory? It's not tapping out. Even if we don't defeat our problem with agency or with the classroom or with culture or whatever, that's not the definition of victory. The definition is that we have not tapped out to the very end. And I think that will give that will revive the idea of agency, because a lot of people, I've seen this down to my own life, a lot of people start seeing about these problems and they become daunted because they have the wrong definition of what will make them victorious in that situation.
I love that. Thank you. And that's a great place to begin to close our conversation, but I did want to give you a chance if there was more that you wanted to say about the health and wellness conference, and in terms of, I don't know if you have speakers already lined up and know who's going to be part of it, or what, more specific topics that you're going to cover.
That remains to be seen. I have to hustle. Everything gets done, as I say to myself 100 times a day. Everything gets done, but not on my timeline. And so I will be hustling for that very shortly after this recording in the early spring. So I invite the audience to check back about that. But likely one of our speakers is someone who will be presenting a separate event that's appropriate to our podcast today, Emily. And that's Janice Barcello from Birth of a New Earth. And Janice's focus in her many books and seminars, of which the seminar I'm going to talk about is one, focuses on healthy birth, healthy parenting, trauma-free parenting. And Janice and Apocatastasis have teamed up later this spring. And indeed, she may well be speaking at our conference in the summer. And Janice is going to offer through Apocatastasis a look at autism, the causes of autism, autism awareness, and please God, autism avoidance, most importantly. And Janice has an often unheard or we'll say neglected reason for autism in her meditations, that in addition to vaccines and some other things we often hear, that the ultrasound machine is a major culprit in this hell on earth, which really, if you see some of these videos of these poor people and also their poor caretakers, really, I think Dante's missing a chapter from the Inferno, because it's truly hell on earth what these people have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to avoid that, and want to ameliorate problems caused, and want to avoid things we say in America. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it would be grand if people could support these collaborations. We want to build them into the future. It helps Apocatastasis out. It helps our scholars out. I think in the alt community, the truth community, whatever we call ourselves, there's a lot of talk going on, and that's good, thank God. And soon enough, Emily's going to be displacing Mr. Rogan on the podcast
Right. No
schedules.
doubt. Any day
No
now.
doubt. Any day now. But also to our work at Apocatastasis, to Emily's work with her Galactic Priestess work, it's time to move beyond just talking. And we really do need to start replacing the existing systems. So please help support, whether that's Emily's retreats, but also things like Janice's work and institutions like Apocatastasis with these programs.
Mm-hmm. So, and of course, I'll include many links in the show notes, but for those who are listening elsewhere, tell people how they can find a pocket. Maybe you want to spell it for people too.
Sure. Yes. So Apocatastasis, and that word again means restoration in Greek. And ApocatastasisInstitute is spelled APOCATIS. Hold on. TAS. Hold on. We're going to start from the top here. It's not like I've been doing this for a decade. Oh my goodness gracious.
That makes me feel better because I can never remember how to spell it.
Okay, here we're going to do it for real here. APOCATASTASIS Apocatastasis Institute. You can find us at apocatastasisinstitute.wordpress.com. And we're also on BitChute, Rumble. We have pages for Facebook, LinkedIn, Discord, and how do you say, Telegram.
And
And
Substack.
also Substack, yes, Substack. And then also I've dusted off the bastards in Silicon Valley haven't caught me yet. I've dusted off an old YouTube channel I had. Emily might have been around when they cashiered our channel the first time, because I called NATO cannibals and talked about their weird hand-folded architecture of their building. That did us in after doing a marathon about why someone could not have been possibly elected in 2020. That really put me on their shit list, and they axed our channel there. But we're back on for the moment of YouTube.
You'll see how long you last there.
You can count the minutes, I think.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, John. As always, fantastic to talk with you. And I feel like we could talk for many more hours. So you'll have to come back and we'll have another conversation. But I'm looking forward to the health conference and your other offerings. And yeah, thank you for your great work in the world, in the realm of education and beyond.
Well, great. Thank you, Emily. You're welcome for that. And thank you for what you do. And thank you for having me on this podcast. And thank you for your various outreaches. I think one hand washes another in terms of different communities interacting. So it's been a great honor to be on with you today.
Great. Thank you, John.